All right. Well, thank you, Samantha. And as Samantha already said, I'm Mary Ann Morey from the Central District of the State Library, and Jay Peterson, the consultant with North Central. And we both have an interest in what we term information literacy. More about that phrase later. But we're doing this session. You can see the title here about deciphering information in a misinformation culture. If only there were always only two sides to a story, but that doesn't usually happen. It's very difficult and becoming even increasingly more difficult to find clear sides to information. But the reality is that most all the time there's a lot of fuzziness and a lot of grayness in any news story. And it depends on perspective too, because the same story, the same event can be viewed very differently. And when you're trying to determine fact from fiction, that myth doesn't always jump out at you in bold red type like it does here on this graphic. And myths are usually fuzzy and blurry, as are facts. And sometimes you'll even see the two mixed in the same report, the same article from the same resource. And that makes deciphering the truth even more difficult, more challenging. Jay, I think you wanted to talk
Yeah,
about this myth aspect here.
yeah, and I wanted to talk about just about sometimes when we talk about these things, I think it's important to know how these facts get played out over time. And part of why I enjoy this topic is because I was a history major undergrad and love history. And so when you're doing historical research, they talk about things as if there's the first, the first person sources to any event,
Original.
which tends to be the primary source documents, which are news stories. News stories do qualify for that, but then there's always the secondary sources that are like the material that's written off those first person accounts, and that all this stuff that kind of comes out, all the facts of the time. It generally in historical circles, it kind of takes almost 40 years for these things to even out and people to siphon through all the facts and separate myth from fiction. And these things can take, many decades to get parsed out. So just be aware that we're just now getting the straight scoop about things that happened all the way back in the 80s, late 70s. So,
well, and I just had this conversation this morning with some librarians. Coronavirus, of course, has occupied a lot of the news over the past several months. And the information we receive about that has been changing as new facts are learned. That doesn't necessarily mean that the previous facts were a myth. It just means we've learned new facts that perhaps have disproven those old ones. So that just adds even more to the whole fuzziness, the blurriness of things. But this ability to decipher information from misinformation is a term known as information literacy. This term has gone through a lot of changes, transformations, either with renaming or sometimes relational names. And so I think many, many years ago, librarians talked a lot about bibliographic instruction, and you don't hear that term anymore, but that really is what information literacy is. There's also media literacy, digital literacy, but this general term of information literacy is still used among librarians, and it's kind of that overarching theme. And Jay, I think you wanted to point out something pretty important about the difference between digital literacy and information literacy.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about digital literacy, kind of especially in a library setting, we're kind of talking about people who can do the functions of operating digital tools. It's the physicality of it. It's running a smartphone, being able to go to a website, that sort of thing. And I think it gets very convoluted with the idea of being informationally literate. Maybe that bibliographic term goes away. But I think there's lots of people out there who are super, super digitally literate, digitally proficient with the tools, and have absolutely no information literacy whatsoever. And it's kind of staggering.
Yeah, and a lot of studies have proven that, in fact. Before we get too much further, we just want to remind you what our goals are for this purpose. This is actually taken from our learning objectives that were outlined in the continuing ed catalog about this class. And basically, we hope to accomplish two things during this session. First, we hope to help you have a vital role, help you realize that you have a vital role in information literacy by providing and equipping, and then two, provide you with some very basic ways and some very simple resources that can help you help your patrons become more information literate. That's the learning and the implementing part. And we hope to accomplish these goals by looking at several examples from a variety of scenarios and views. And I think one thing you'll see is that this comes from all spectrums here. We're not picking on just one side. I happen to be somebody who I've often said I kind of pull up a chair, get out the popcorn, sit back and watch on social media. I have friends from way over here to way over here and everybody in between. Some of these techniques and things that you'll see that we'll discuss today about misinformation apply across the board, regardless of social, economic, educational, political, or religious views. So what about the library's overall role? This came from a Forbes article, actually, in 2013. It was titled, Why Public Libraries Matter and How They Can Do More. And I think these quotes are important to consider of why the library has a role in all of this. Public libraries in America are dynamic, versatile community centers when we're not in the midst of a pandemic, right? Libraries have a great influence. They go through the whole family and create a great sense of community through books. And I like this quote, libraries support three core missions that this article identified: promoting reading, offering access to information, and anchoring communities. Now, you may not have seen anything about information literacy specifically mentioned from that article, but it did mention offering access to information and anchoring communities. And those were noted as core missions of the public library. So why is the library the place for those core missions? Well, I think the first is because we are trusted and we do reach a lot of people of all ages, from the very young toddlers that come in for our story time to the seniors and everybody in between. We have resources such as classes, ready-made audiences. We have our website, databases, pathfinders. And I think most librarians are really good about developing relationships, and you may already have many of those relationships in place with individuals, with your students, with your schools, senior groups, etc. And librarians are supposed to be information experts. And because librarians have been helping people fact check since forever. This came out of Libraries Transform. And remember, I used that term bibliographic instruction. That really has been something that librarians have been doing for decades. So we're supposed to be good at this. This is part of who we are as library staff. Now, if you don't take my word for it that the public finds libraries trustworthy, then here's a research report from Pew Research Center. And you'll see these two text boxes over here. The first one talks about 6 in 10 adults say they could be helped if they got training on how to find trustworthy information. So they admit that they need the help. And that bottom box then is that they trust libraries. They see us as helpful in meeting their information needs. I think another reason that public libraries may be trusted is that we're typically thought to be neutral. And that's probably because we provide information from all points of view. We don't judge people on what they check out or choose as their reading or viewing material. And we're not here to sell anything. So that's part of why libraries are viewed as a neutral location. Now, interestingly enough, at the 2018 ALA Midwinter Conference, there was a big debate about the neutrality of libraries. And I've got a link to that article there that you can certainly look at that on your own. That whole concept of neutrality in libraries is a topic that could warrant an entire webinar, and we don't have time to get into that today. So let's look at the library's role of providing. The logical conclusion, I think, to all of this is that libraries and public librarians in particular should be providing instruction and resources that can help the public decipher information that they're finding from their friends, from the media, from social media, and elsewhere. And in the 21st century, it's critical that your library have staff members who have at least moderately good tech skills and good information research skills. So many people access their news from the internet now. They get their information, employment, communication resources through the internet. So you can begin to help your public become information literate by having staff who are information literate. So when you're doing any kind of hiring, I would hope you're hiring not just for good customer service skills, but also for some good tech skills, which is the very beginning point of being information literate in this digital age. You really can't help the public with these skills until your library staff, and that may include you, become literate in this area. So in just a few more slides, just hang on, we are going to show you some very basic things that all of your library staff should know and that you can in turn pass on to your employees. I just have to mention that one of the reasons we're doing this webinar is because I had a library director in my district say, can you come to my library and show me how I can, or show my public how they can be more information literate? I said, no, that's not our role at the state library. Our role is to equip you, and we will teach you how to be information literate and give you some tips on how to become that way. And then you in turn can turn around and share that with the public. So that's one of the reasons we're doing this session today. I hope you're all subscribing to the suite of databases that the state library provides. We offer these at huge, tremendously huge discounts. These are quality databases that you can provide for your community to use free of charge with their library card. Why, some people may ask, why should we have these resources? We've got Google. Well, I do like Google. I use it all the time. I wish I had invested in it years ago, but there is information that Google cannot access. There is something known as the deep web. And a lot of people aren't aware of this, but if you've ever done a Google search and you find some information, you go, oh, this is perfect, just what I need. And all of a sudden a little box pops up and it says, for $19.95, you can access the rest of this story. That's Google sending its little feelers out, looking into the deep web, but it can't get inside there because there's a paywall. When you subscribe to these databases, you have broken through that paywall and in turn have broken through it for your patrons through the magic use of their library card. They can get through that paywall and search into the deep web. And so these resources and these databases are vetted, they're peer reviewed, and the old saying, you get what you pay for. You know, the Google things are free, and there's some good information that can be accessed through Google, but it's often easier if you can just go to a source that you know it's already vetted, good peer reviewed information. So if you have any questions about the databases, just contact your district office and we'll give you some assistance and or some training. Jay, did you want to comment?
Yeah. I just real quick want to say we're in a really good time right now. I mean, I think we're seeing good access of these resources. I think we saw a lot of parents suddenly find out what their kids were looking at online and seeing what they were getting to and looking at all these wonderful things that libraries have. So, you know, I think we'll see some value in these going forward. And, you know, people are really learning the difference between something you pay a little bit for, you know, and to have access to versus Google searches. I think that really came out recently.
Yeah, and these are so tremendously discounted that particularly if you're a smaller size library, what you pay for these databases is so nominal. It's just incredible that you can get them for this price. You have another database that you don't have to pay anything for because the state library has purchased it for you. And that's this database known as Opposing Viewpoints. And this database is interesting because it offers essays from a variety of perspectives on what we might call hot topics or in the news a lot kind of topics. And this is not just for students who have to do an argumentative paper as a school assignment. This can be for anybody who wants to expand their understanding of a topic and see, well, I only see it from this perspective. What does somebody else from a different perspective have to say about it? And why do they think that way? This can really open minds. I think it helps promote critical thinking. And if you've been on any social media platforms, I'm sure you know that a little critical thinking can always be a good thing.
Yeah, and I don't, this one here, it does have First Amendment freedom to read. It has a little Gale in Context. If you want an idea for trustee training, you could just go on Gale in Context and pull that up and get a 2-for-1 of some database training and some freedom to read info.
So let's talk a little bit about the library's role of equipping. This was our second objective today, was to help you understand your role in equipping the public to be more information or media literate. And sometimes, as I said earlier, we may need to first equip ourselves and our library staff. I like this quote, which is attributed on here to Albert Einstein. I will say the actual quote is that I never teach my pupils. I only attempt to provide the conditions in which they can learn. I'll let you do some research to see if Albert Einstein really did say this. My purpose in putting it on here is not to debate whether or not he actually said it or who the attribution goes to, but to point out that I like the part that says, providing the conditions in which a person can learn. And that's what your public library can do. You can provide conditions in which people can learn. Equipping the public may or may not mean you formally offer a class about information literacy. That can certainly mean that, but more likely it's going to mean that you provide the conditions in which they can learn by having those databases, by having pathfinders, and having assorted resources both in print and online for your public to use. And in case you think there's not a need, this is from 2016. The need is likely even more today. You can see that the little box I added is a quote from this article, again, coming from Pew Research Center. 2 in 3 US adults, that's about 64%, say that fabricated news stories cause a great deal of confusion about the basic facts of current issues and events. So, it comes from all sides, as I mentioned, just an observation from the variety of friends that I have in social media. The same kinds of far-reaching, diehard groups exist, and they all fall for and or promote the same kinds of unproven stories. This comes from, as you can see, a Business Insider report from 2019. And the story was titled, "The 10 Most Viewed Fake News Stories on Facebook in 2019 Were Just Revealed in a New Report." Kind of a lengthy headline. But numbers 1 and 2 were actually from what we might consider opposing sides. So the propagation of and belief in fake news happens from all points of views. As for checking multiple news outlets, this is a chart that can help you sample from the smorgasbord of media outlets. The center is what we might consider mainstream, or supposedly that's the middle of the road media, but there are a lot of news outlets that are owned by the same parent companies, so we may not have as many choices as people think, but this infographic is designed to show you who's considered center, and then a little bit left and a little bit right, and then further left and further right, and then way out there in outer fields there. So that helps, I think, a little bit to know what some of these sources are. This infographic was shared in a library journal class that I took a few years ago on the topic of media literacy. The person who created it insisted she was not biased when she put this together, but you know, you have to look at everything a little bit carefully and realize that biases exist even when you think they don't. Jay, you had some information about this NDIA, and I'm going to let you talk about this interesting topic here.
Yeah, this is a relatively new thing that kind of appeared on our map, and we're still kind of talking about it. It's been around for about a month, and so I'm still kind of negotiating with those folks and getting on those calls. But what COVID, the pandemic crisis, kind of brought out to us is that this Digital Inclusion Association, that's what this is, National Digital Inclusion, they wanted to offer more resources to replicate, what libraries do in person and kind of do that more remotely. So they're kind of starting to talk about these projects of training the trainer and moving forward with having some sort of, reference, online reference, online digital help sort of thing to expand that to a broader reach in some of these areas where maybe the libraries are kind of swamped, or they're just not open, or what are they, how can we back that up and just see how this works better to have people help with digital questions, about, facts, media, anything that they're kind of looking for, and offer that more broadly. So I thought this was an interesting concept, and maybe we'll be working on this more as this goes forward. So
yeah, I think we'll hear a lot more about this as time goes on.
But the NDIA is a really great little group, and they're always trying stuff like this in a broad way, and they're also encouraging, broadband expansion and better connectivity for everybody, and it's all kinds of the kind of things that are that were a good idea before the pandemic and are a really good idea now. So
yeah, I think the pandemic brought a lot of this to the forefront, that libraries in particular have known these situations have existed for a long time, but the pandemic really brought it to the attention of a lot of people who otherwise were going, oh, I had no idea.
mm.
Let me get my slide to go here. A few slides back, we said that library staff, and I've said this maybe a couple of times in this session so far, that library staff needs to be part of this provision of the task of developing information literacy skills. And one of our objectives is to help you, your library staff, gain some basic skills in information literacy that you can in turn impart to the public. So time doesn't allow us to go beyond the basics, but we're going to share some tips and some tricks that every librarian should know. Consider this scaffolding upon which you can build additional skills through some additional classes and resources that we'll also share in just a moment. One of the first things you need to understand are the domain suffixes that appear in a URL, the website address. This is a very easy way to determine what it is you're looking at before you even click on that link. So I put this together for another class that I teach, and I think it's kind of helpful. And if you haven't really done a lot of online searching, or you've never really thought about what you're clicking on, this is one of the first things you want to start paying attention to. What does that www.blah.com or .edu or .gov, what does that .com, .edu, .gov mean? And you can see here what they mean. Now, the tricky part to all of this is that .orgs sometimes aren't the nice, neat, nonprofit organizations you might think they are. And a .edu, you see something that says it's Harvard.edu, you go, oh, this must be really authentic and from a very smart individual. Well, when I was a student at the University of Illinois, I had to create websites as part of some of my assignments, and I had the right and was required to actually use the University of Illinois' website URL, .edu it ended with, but it was my work. So be careful when you're accessing something from a .edu. It doesn't always come from the most learned and prestigious professor. It might be coming from the D- student. You just never know. So don't just assume that, oh, it says .edu, it must be okay. And the other interesting thing I want to point out here is .mil, which you don't see too often in a general search. That stands for military, but realize that their recruitment sites use .com. So if you're looking for official information from Air Force, for example, you would want to go to an Air Force .mil as opposed to an Air Force .com. So I think we're going to show you here just a moment how you can utilize this basic information to help sift through some information or guide your patrons into sifting through some information. So you've got a real life situation here in your library. Somebody comes in and they want to do a search for heart disease, and so they go to the most official resource that they know, and that's Google, right? And how many of us have used Google already today multiple times? Like I said, I love Google. I'm not condemning Google. I'm thankful for it, and all my respects to all those librarians who worked in libraries before the age of Google. But you enter this basic search of heart disease, and after doing that, you get a long list of results. And actually, in this particular search that I did, the result list was about 900 billion. Yeah, I have to look at that number. I mean, it's a number that's so big, it may as well be gazillion, right? It's a number so big you don't even know how to interpret it. Studies have shown that people usually go through the first 10 results, and if they don't see what they want, they either take something and say, it's good enough, or they think that their information doesn't exist because they just don't want to plod through the long list. So keep that in mind. But as we're looking through this, one of the first things you can do is apply what we just said on that last screen, or 2 screens ago, to look at that domain suffix. So here we have a .com, another .com, a .org, a .gov. How could you help a patron? How could you explain to a patron how you might sift through this information? Or how would you help them understand the difference between the .gov versus the .org site or the .com site? Anybody want to type in the chat? I don't think we have microphones authenticated today, but type in the chat. How could you help somebody sift through this? Or which of these might you recommend as a possible reliable source? Crickets. Jay, did we lose our audience?
Did we lose our audience? We're watching the chat. Is everyone typing? Okay, they got a .gov would be better. .gov would have less advertising versus .com. .gov most reliable. .com more commercial.
Yeah, the .com. I think, is it Mayo Clinic that uses a .com? I think. Now, Mayo Clinic is certainly a reputable resource, but when it has that .com, just realize there's going to be a commercial aspect to it.
Yes, or maybe the .edu. The .org, especially in these cases, sometimes it's like, it's not maybe as in-depth as some things, because there'll be like an advocacy for dealing with that. It's like the Komen Breast Cancer Foundation sort of links. It also depends on the search term. You put in heart disease, and then you're kind of just tossing everything at you in that first page.
Right. Yeah, that's a pretty broad search term when you think about it. So we don't have time today to get into narrowing your searches and keyword versus subject searching, but those are all things to consider. Tanya comments that she would compare a few sites, which yes, definitely you'd want to do that. Other resources that you could offer to your patron besides just a Google search could be those Gale databases I mentioned. And no, I don't get any kickback from how many libraries subscribe to Gale. That's not why I keep saying this. I just want you to realize that you have other options, especially if you're already subscribing to these databases. There are two specific health databases. One is Health and Medicine, the other known as Health and Wellness. That first one, Health and Medicine, is quite a bit more technical in its information. It's geared more toward scholarly types of articles, people who are already in the medical field, lots of medicalese kind of talk, whereas the Health and Wellness one is more for the layperson. And then as a librarian, I hope you have taken advantage of resources, webinars, articles that can help you learn where to go for reliable information, and that would include reliable health information. I hope you have at least heard of PubMed and Medline Plus, and if not, now you have. PubMed and Medline Plus, you can see they both end with .gov as a domain suffix. Medline Plus is more for the layperson, while the PubMed is more scholarly, more for the person already in the medical field. So definitely utilize that Medline Plus information. So now a few simple practical evaluation tools that can help you and your staff become more information literate. And again, these are simple tools you can pass along to your patrons. There are a lot of resources out there to help you learn about particularly website evaluation, but this information applies to any resource, whether it's on the internet or in a book or in a newspaper. This is one that I developed years ago when I was working with younger students, and I still use it this day. I work part-time at a local college, and this consists of 5 A's because I like alliteration. So the first thing is to look at the author, who actually wrote this or who's responsible for this information, and what are their credentials. And then what is the purpose, the aim of this article? Is it to inform? Is it for lay people versus the medical field people like we were just talking about in that last one? Is it to sell? Is it satire? Some people completely forget that that's actually a purpose of some websites, as we'll see in a moment. Again, this kind of ties in with the aim. Who is the audience? Is it on the right level for the person that's doing the research? There's a big difference between scholarly articles for the advanced degree student, college student, versus a 6th grade student. And how appropriate is it for the particular need of the individual, or how relevant is it for their search, their topic, and also the age of the person, if you're dealing with students. Another really popular evaluation tool is known as the CRAP method. kids seem to really like this one because they just think it's funny, the name of it. But you can see what the 5 letters here stand for, and we're not going to read all of these to you. We will make these slides available later so you can have access to them and see what they all mean. But just realize that you have to be very careful when you're using any kind of evaluation tool, that you have to go through all the steps. So for example, if you're just looking at the author, the authenticity of the credentials of the person or the organization providing the information, that may not be enough. Because think about that for a moment. If the information is shady, if it's false information, don't you think the person saying how great they are might be falsifying that information too? So you have to look at all the steps and be very thorough in your evaluation. You can't just check one of these letters of the evaluation tool and move on. You have to look at it from all of these points. Jay, did you want to say something about this particular method?
I was kind of referring to that first one, mostly for your point of the satire and how that has changed massively in the past, 20 to 30 years, of like the kind of infotainment comedian / angle on the satire on the news. And that, like, there's, it would have been better to have a study here, but so many people get their news from like the Daily Show and all these places, and you're always making this differentiation of like, well, it's a comedian, but he's doing the news, and it's like, what the disconnect there and how that news kind of fits. So it's kind of, I remember that the audience is to entertain, but also like they're probably interviewing somebody who is relevant to you. So it sits in this weird zone of like, they're an authority, but they're also doing satire and comedy, and that line gets really blurred of like opinion and fact.
And I think the same holds true with so many news shows, if you will, that highlight opinion versus the news reporting, and it's often difficult to tell the difference there. Interestingly, somebody posted in the chat that she utilized these types of evaluation methods when she was doing the weeding and refreshing of her health and wellness section at the library. I think that's really a good idea of how to utilize this. This is another evaluation tool, the ABCs. This is coming out of San Diego Mesa College, authority, bias, and then 2 C's for currency and content. Maybe you're starting to see some patterns here. All of these evaluation tools that we've shared, they have very similar elements, and they might be titled something a little differently, but they're all basically having you analyze the same concepts. This method, this STAR method, when I was looking at this on South Carolina's, University of South Carolina's libraries where I got this, and by the way, I have the URLs for all of these that you can actually look at them from the original source where I got these. But this is a modification of the ABC and the CRAP method, and they developed it into the STAR acronym, with S meaning slant, meaning a viewpoint or bias, and the T for topical, meaning timely. And then you can see the others are for authority, accuracy, and relevancy. This comes out of Kent State University, and they kind of summarize the audience aim appropriateness of my 5A tool, but they included this usability consideration. So again, just realize that there are basic things to look for in any piece of information you receive. And I think the most important thing is that you are reading the information and critiquing it and looking to see if it has any kind of credibility.
That one is huge. I had to comment on that one. That's a very easy one to tell right away, because we've all had those ones. If it's absolutely pummeled and pop-ups and all sort of this stuff, it's very unusable. And a good check for this is trying to scroll to the bottom of any of these things. If they don't have a good, what they call a doormat, that on the bottom section, that's kind of speaking up and kind of giving the credentials for that page. If that it doesn't exist or is really, really fishy, that's a great judge of this usability on a website.
You talked about being able to scroll to the bottom of the page, and we don't even have time to talk about clickbait, but that's another thing to be aware of, is something that sounds really interesting and promising, and you open it up and it's just ad after ad, or you have to keep advancing after every half paragraph. Just don't even use those kinds of things. This is something Jay found, that it is a class. You can, as far as I know, just the other day I double checked this, it was still live, that you could still access this link to be able to take this class. There is a modest charge for it. But the interesting thing about this, if you look down where the presenter is, it's Peter Adams of the News Literacy Project. And we actually, wow, Jay, how long has this been? Probably 7, 8 years ago in Iowa. We were a pilot state for what was known as the News Know-How Project. And Peter Abrams was responsible for that, and maybe some of you in the audience, your libraries were participants in that. But here are some of the things that you'll learn in this class that you could take. I thought this was interesting. It said this is in relation to what this class is talking about. It says today's youth are inheriting the largest and most complex information landscape in human history, one that is rife with increasingly deceptive and devious forms of misinformation. Even for adult patrons, deciding what's fake news or not can be very confusing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, so let's put some of these evaluation tools that we just discussed into practice. In a real life scenario, this article was posted by a friend of mine on Facebook, and she nearly started a Facebook riot with this post because she posted this with some kind of comment that said, "Isn't this terrible?" Okay. Now, is this fake or real? And how would you know? And before you think, wow, Marianne, you really got some wacko friends, I'm guessing some of you have some friends who post some questionable things from time to time. Okay, somebody's jumping in right away saying it's fake, it's got to be fake. Somebody says there's surely a link, check the address. And somebody asks, what's the source? Some of you are just automatically saying it's got to be fake, it's got to be fake. And I'm wondering, why do you say that right off the bat? How can you tell?
Author previous work.
Somebody says it seems too extreme and sarcastic. Sounds like clickbait. It's hyperbole.
Mm-hmm. That's a great tone.
Mm-hmm.
Tone's huge. Did you ever
Doesn't
see a news story that would lead with that?
Yeah, doesn't seem reasonable. Okay, so what would you do if you saw this from a friend on social media? What would be one of the first things you might do?
What happens if you click on politics and world?
Oh, those two little tabs up at the top.
Yeah, what does that do?
So maybe
Good
delve
point.
into the site a little bit more carefully. What else
say
might
where
be?
It's coming from.
It doesn't say right here, but how could you figure out where it's coming from? So when I'm asking what would you do, most of you are saying I would scroll past it. I might just hide it from any news feeds I might get.
Go to the about page of the website. Well, that's good. Reverse image search. that's a good one.
A reverse image search is very helpful if there's a questionable photo. Now, this is just a stock photo of an individual. He's not doing anything questionable. It's just a picture of him. I don't know that a reverse image search might be helpful with this, but when you see action photos, that certainly could be an example of when you might do a reverse image, or when there's something stated in the headline that is referring to the photo, that might be a time to do a reverse image search.
Marianne, someone's mentioning Snopes. Do you have a line on Snopes?
I think people still do use Snopes. I think we talk about that a little later here.
Yeah.
Lateral reading, somebody mentions, good. Okay, so, and somebody says, check some other news sources to see if it was published anywhere else. So the first thing I would recommend that you do is to open it and read it. Or first of all, you could actually look to see what the link was, because I think when this was posted, I almost think the link, you could see it. If not, you could certainly see it once you open it. So when we look at this link, what can you see from that? What's that domain suffix there that we talked about, and what does that mean? It's a .com, and what does that typically mean? Commercial. Yeah. Okay, good. what else can we tell from that URL? Where is it coming from? Can you tell the organization by looking at that web address? Babylon Bee. Okay, Mary spoiled it for us. A couple of you already saying Babylon Bee is satire. All right, now let's assume you didn't know this. So what are some things you could do? Well, you could click on the link and read beyond the headline. Please read beyond the headline. And where somebody asked, where do you see the web address? Well, it may have been included in the post that the friend shared, or when you click on the article, you should be able to see it. So read beyond the headline. And this first opening says, America still has a lot of poor people, and that's because we haven't been aggressive in implementing socialist programs that cause mass starvation, Sanders said, his fingers flopping around like 10 tiny, wacky, inflatable tube men. That's the opening sentence. Does that sound like legitimate reporting to you? And I don't care what your opinion is of Bernie Sanders, it doesn't matter here. You can read that and realize that that's not real reporting, right? The next thing you can do is let's back all the way up in that URL. So this URL appears at the top of your screen in the search bar when you open the article. Just start backing up and stop when you get to the end of that domain suffix. babylonbee.com. And when you get there, and thanks, Jay, talking about the URL, that's what it actually means, Universal Resource Locator, is the web address. When you back up to babylonbee.com, that will take you to the homepage. Sometimes that's the fastest way to get to a site's homepage, is just back up to that domain suffix. So when you get to that homepage, like Jay was saying, you scroll down. Usually it's down in the doormat. Once in a while it's up at the top, but somewhere on that homepage it's going to have something that's basically titled About Us. And when you click on that, then you see, who is this Babylon Bee? The Babylon Bee is the world's best satire site. Boom, right off the bat, they're very honest about it. And it says, we write satire about Christian stuff, political stuff, everyday life. It was created ex nihilo on the 8th day of creation 6,000 years ago. You know, you start reading this and you realize, okay, it's a joke. It's meant to be funny. It's meant to be satirical. So any fourth grader can learn to do some of these things we just showed you, right? Now, this is interesting. By the way, how would you respond to your friend on social media once you learned these things? Would you still say nothing to the friend, or would you do anything?
Someone mentioned that in the comments already. They said they said if they knew the person and they would kind of, politely talk to them, message them, and say that's a little more friendly way to do it than getting in a flame war about it.
Right. Yeah, just letting the person know, whether politely on the person's public site or in a private message, do you know that this is satire? This is not true. This is published by an organization that's supposed to be a joke. They're making fun of things, and maybe send them that link to the About Us so that your friend can read this. Now, interestingly enough, I have done this on multiple times, multiple occasions, and the friend will often say, oh my goodness, I didn't know, I'm so sorry. But I often don't see them remove the information. And to me, that's frustrating, because if I knew that I had unwittingly promoted something that was false, I think I would want to take it down, but that's another story.
And that's a good, someone made a good, Kathy is making a good point. You could comment about it being satire and recommend other better satire sites they might like. Because I agree, this is Babylon Bee is pretty bad satire site. People mention The Onion, which is a much...
Yeah, The Onion is great. And a lot of people...
much funnier.
I've seen people posting things from The Onion too that they think it's real without realizing. But I utilized this example just because it had happened fairly recently. So here we go. Lest you think I have some not so with it friends, or that your friends would never do anything like this. Let's look at this article. And I'm not just going to show you the headline of this, but you see that the headline, 6 out of 10 share this link without reading it. Now, on June 4th of 2016, the satirical news site called the Science Post. Ooh, that's interesting, because that sounds like a fairly legitimate name for a news source, doesn't it? They published a block of lorem ipsum. I'll tell you what that means in just a minute. They published a block of lorem ipsum text under a frightening headline that said, study, 70% of Facebook users only read the headline of science stories before commenting. Now, what is that lorem ipsum? It is dummy text, which has no meaning, but looks very similar to real text. So basically what they do is they posted a headline, and then the rest of it was just nonsense. And nearly 46,000 people shared that post, some of them quite earnestly, which was an inadvertent example of life imitating comedy. Now, as if that needed further proof, the satirical headline has been validated once again, because according to a new study by computer scientists at Columbia University and the French National Institute, this was legitimate. 59% of links shared on social media have never actually been clicked. They've not even been opened. So in other words, most people do appear, nearly 60% of the people appear to retweet or share news without ever reading it. And a quote from that study said, people are more willing to share an article than read it. People form an opinion based on a summary or a summary of summaries, or sometimes even just on a headline, without making the effort to go deeper. Now, here's another real life situation. Not this recent election, but the past election back in the caucuses. Sometimes things happen unintentionally, this false news sharing. So this is a story that happened on my neighborhood Facebook page here in the Des Moines area. Somebody posted a link that was showing people where to go to caucus. Now, that particular link only showed where the Democrat caucuses were happening. And I know there had been some changes in locations and some questions about the Democrat location. So maybe that's why the person posted it. But it could have been misconstrued as somebody trying to be deceptive by sending people only to the locations for a Democrat caucus and not a Republican caucus. So I thought, oh boy, I can see a firestorm starting here. So I got onto this, I think it was the Secretary of State's website, and I shared a link. I said, here are the locations of all the caucus locations, regardless of which party you're affiliating with. And so they did thank me. I think the person had unwittingly posted that original source that only showed the locations for Democrat sites. So sometimes even people who have the best intentions of sharing what they think is useful information, they could fall trapped sharing either false, biased, or in that situation, incomplete information. And that is if they haven't been responsible enough or careful enough to do a little fact checking first. And sometimes that fact checking is just as simple as reading the article. So let's talk now about implementing the skills. There's kind of a narrow line here between equipping the public and implementing these skills. So I think maybe it's by implementing the skills that you're going to equip your patrons. We can't talk about this equipping and implementing without looking at EDGE. And before you go, oh, here they go, talking about that EDGE stuff again. I just want to say that this is such a useful tool. And if you haven't taken advantage of it, please do. The State Library has purchased this for all of our libraries to utilize. This is in its second version, which is different than the first one. I think many of you have done the first version, but if you haven't done the second version, please do it. It's easier than the first. It won't take you much time, and it will be more up-to-date information. But just in a summary, the EDGE program, the EDGE initiative is, it's basically like having an IT person, an IT consultant come into your library and do an evaluation, not only of your physical digital things, the computers you have and such, but also things that you can do to promote digital and information literacy. And Jay has pulled a lot of examples here to share with you in the next few slides. So Jay, I'm going to let you take over here.
Yeah, and please, we're gonna be bugging you about this again going forward. So Edge 2.0 has been out for a while now. It is they streamlined it to quite a lot. And what Marianne was getting at there with it kind of being a full suite of things, if you're thinking of it as just being an assessment and inventory of what is going on digitally in your library, it does ask for stuff like that. But it really does assess your community impact with your technology as well. And I think it's really great for that.
I just
And
want to say
yeah.
it gives really simple things you can do to promote information literacy and digital literacy at your library, which, as you can see here from this
Mhm.
slide, promotes community value.
Yeah, and overall, when remember this when you get done, just to kind of start about it, it's going to give you things that are relevant to libraries your size. So don't look at this and say, I'm not, this big urban library who has all this stuff. It'll give you stuff that's applicable to a library your size and compare you with other libraries on there. And no library out there is going to do 100% on all these things. So don't worry about the score numbers that are in here. But this is a really kind of the first part here of the community value, and that first thing that Marianne circled there, having people determine whether information is trustworthy, very directly to our conversation today. And also, if you want to switch to civic engagement as well. So this one's vital. This one's your libraries are making impact on your community. This is going to happen more and more. As we go forward, there's very little of this stuff that's being done on paper, being done in offices, less and less faxes, all that kind of stuff. It's all happening on smartphones. It's happening online. So this, knowing about civic engagement, knowing about legal information, knowing about how to interact with your government, the libraries are vital for that. So same thing, we already discussed about PubMed, health resources, that sort of thing. And you can see here, you may not be doing lots of health interactions, I mean, doing lots of health classes, but be open to the idea that maybe there's a traveling nurse or something like that in town, or if there are resources out there, your staff has some sort of, maybe you have a little flyer on, here's the local medical information, here's some things we've got. Direct
Or
them,
even
yeah.
like this top one I have circled, organizing the online resources to learn about good quality medical resources is something that you
Mm-hmm.
can do. That's an easy thing that your library can do that doesn't really cost a lot of money other than some effort on your staff and incorporating it into your website. But it's so valuable in helping the public find good, reliable, quality information.
And
I
that
liked what
help, yeah. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I like what Cynthia said, that her whole county got together, the library directors in her county, and they all completed the EDGE assessment at the same time. And that's a really smart thing to do, because then all of your libraries can start to work on these things together. And maybe you can break it apart and say, okay, you're going to cover the health resources, you're going to cover the eGov resources, and then you can share that information with each other and make really good pathfinders on your websites.
Oh no, I want to go back to something. Sorry, I just saw it. It's Uniform Resource Locator. Not Universal Resource Locator. Oh no, URL might mean that. Oh, I'm sorry, Rod.
I was thinking it was universal when I,
Yeah, maybe the term changed. I don't
yeah,
know.
that could be something too. But regardless, when we talk about a URL, we're talking about a web address. So,
Yeah, sorry. Thanks. Good point though. And so this is more referring to those databases we've talked about too. If your library is taking part in the Gale resources or something along those lines, this helps you there. Do you have homework help? Do you have that sort of thing in your library? Something that is going to be age grade appropriate? Do you have any classes on getting through that content in some way? Do you expose that to any of your staff? Do you have little flyers about it? Do you put out little Gale? How do you interact with those resources, and how do you do that? I know a lot of our libraries, because of that, they're doing that thing where they're impacting all the different age groups and all the different communities. They're doing stuff for homeschoolers. They're doing stuff for, interacting with public school groups. They're doing all those things together. So those are really important areas that libraries help with. And so just a real pitch on the cycle. They have this little process here. I really like this graphic. That you're going to prepare, you're going to do the assessment, you compare to the libraries, and then you're going to act. And so EDGE 2.0 can help you a lot in making your planning process for accreditation as well. You can pull the things that you get out of EDGE and
yeah.
use those to write your goals and objectives when you're doing long range planning.
Yeah, for your strategic plan. I will add that it's also useful for any kind of grant applications you might be considering to help you improve some of your tech capabilities. Maybe you want to get hotspots, you want to buy new computers, you want to increase your broadband. the Edge can help you with that information. But the main thing tied into this class today is that it's going to point you to resources or suggestions of ways that you can promote better information literacy and access to information for your public, which in turn gives you community value. And by the way, I just want to comment that Rod, I appreciate how he says he's fact checking, which is good. You should fact check everything you hear and learn. So I appreciate you calling us about that, Rod. Digital inclusion from the Urban Libraries Council. Jay, you want to talk about this white paper?
This is actually something that's in the Edge materials after you go through Edge, and I just thought this quote was great. And this is pulling some things from their the Urban Libraries Resource Council. They're, you know, you don't have to be an urban library to go look at their stuff, but yeah, I mean, what a great statement! What libraries do. We're doing digital inclusion, you know, providing connectivity. Everyone's coming there to you know, upgrade their digital skills and trust online resources. I mean, this is, I just tattoo this on the front of the library. It's what we do. It's really great stuff.
Yeah, and if you look at the second part of that, it says digital inclusion is not just having the online access, but it extends to providing people the ability to upgrade their digital skills and to understand how to trust the online resources and information. So that's one of your jobs as a public librarian. Mm-hmm. We couldn't do this class without mentioning this concept, which is known as confirmation bias, because I think it's so important to mention this when we're talking about information literacy. And I think this little meme that I found online kind of illustrates what confirmation bias is. You know, I don't have to fact check that. It agrees with my views, so it must be true. And when I took a class a few years ago specifically on this topic, and I've been interested in this topic of information literacy since before I got my library degree, but I took this class a few years ago from Library Journal, and this was one of the presentations that was included in that. And then I think this is also actually separately located from this link. You can still access this from ALA. The presenter of this, who was a professor at UIUC, she said, confirmation is the idea that we look for news and information that confirms what we already believe. So it's important that when you're reading news sources that you first check your own biases. So as an example, I have a right-leaning friend who refuses to watch CNN and solely relies on Fox News. I have a left-leaning friend who refuses to watch Fox News and solely relies on CNN. So I've often said that, you know, both sides, if there really are only two sides to an issue, and there usually are a lot more, they're all guilty of the same thing. And my friends have helped me confirm that fact. But I think that this is why it's so important that when you're accessing news, you look at a variety of sources. And that graphic we shared earlier can be helpful in that and in helping people to compare. One of you said one of the first things you would do is to compare stories and to look for other sources that might have the same story. Jay, your experiences with that?
Oh no, I love it. This is like a great, you know, example of something we kind of do every day, and we definitely all are guilty of this. And I try not to run into it, but boy, it's really hard. And I think we all have to do a little discipline in our own lives about it. But you know, it's easy to find, you know, something that you agree with and never look anywhere else. And those bubbles, you know, you live in your own bubble sphere. That's what people mention. Right. You know, and an echo chamber too is a common way of talking about this. You know, you're hearing your own thoughts back in your head by everything on social media.
So if I were to ask you what number you see, what would you say? Just type it in the chat. Interesting. Now you can't all be right.
Yeah.
I'm seeing, somebody says 10. Ooh, I like that.
10.
Number? I don't see a number.
Oh, left brain, right brain. Yeah. Depending on what people guess, for sure.
Yeah, you can see.
Oh, I got a G. A G. Now everyone's doing
Oh,
G.
interesting. A G. Yeah,
I think that's a G. Yep.
It depends. And you look at it different ways, right? Here it is. The way you do things isn't always the only way to do them or to see things. The way you see things isn't always the only way to see something. And respect what other people are thinking and how they see something or how they interpret it. You can see at the top 6 plus 3. Yeah, that does equal 9, but so does 5 plus 4. And so does 8 plus 1, and 2 plus 7. So it's interesting to be able to look at things from multiple perspectives. And that's why I think it's important that when we're looking at a particular news story, we do maybe start in that middle column of those news resources, but then we branch out a blog or two to see what some of the other sides are saying. And my two friends, the one that only watches Fox and the one that only watches CNN, they both need to watch other news sources. When you stick with just the one, it's not always the best thing for you. Yeah, just looking at somebody's talking about old school point counterpoint.
Oh yeah, he's saying about,
yeah.
well, the news site The Week did opposing viewpoints. That's
Yeah, Lisa says it's hard to be open-minded when you only watch one particular news source. Yeah. So in the essence of time, we need to wrap things up, but think about how can you implement some of these skills so you can get the person who's seeing the number 6 and the number 9, how can you get them to kind of come together a little bit? How might you help people of what seem to be opposing sides come together and meet in the middle, at least to try to agree that they can respect each other's opinions? Any ideas, any comments? Listen instead of react. I like that. I think listening is especially important right now. Sometimes just agreeing to disagree. Yeah.
Yeah. Better Angels discussion group. That's interesting. Can you?
I like that. Listening to learn, not listening to respond. That's good.
Yeah. What's that quote? The quote, you can have your own opinion, but not your own facts. You're entitled to your own opinion. Yeah. Is a Better Angel discussion group, is that something sponsored?
I don't recognize that title of that group.
Libraries across, okay.
So is this a discussion group, like a community engagement kind of group? Is that what it is? Maybe. Linda makes an interesting comment. The 6 and the 9, those are both fact to that individual based upon how they see it on where they were when they saw that. But being able to bring those people together to talk about why did you see this as a 6 and why did you see it as a 9? Sometimes I think it helps to understand their eyes, their experiences, their perspectives.
Well, you're summing it up as the Better Angels as being marriage counseling for politics. That makes a little more sense.
That's an interesting way to describe that.
Yeah.
So maybe you can think about some, in addition to information literacy instruction, also some community engagement instruction. And if you do choose to do some programming on this, here are a couple of things you might want to consider. I shared this a few years ago, back when we were doing our town meetings, now known as learning circuits, and we did a session on fake news back then. And I shared this site, which still exists. It's kind of a fun site because you can see, can you tell real news from fake news? And they give you this little paragraph and say, swipe right if you think it's real and left if you think it's fake, or the other way around, I don't remember. So this would be really fun that you could divide your audience in two, and okay, who thinks it's this way? Go stand on this side. Who thinks it's this way? And then ask them, why do you think it's this way? And why do you think it's that way? And then you reveal, is the story real or not? I think that could be a fun program to do information or media literacy among just any group of people. There are a lot of fact-checking sites available. This annotated list, I like that it's annotated, comes from New Mexico State University Library. Start using these resources yourself so that you're familiar with them, and then you can provide the same resources to the public via your website or a handout from your library, or maybe do a program at your library once COVID is over that analyzes a particular news story or event by running it through these fact-checking sites. This also is coming from the New Mexico State University Library that has tips from fact checkers, and I thought this was kind of interesting, and you can see it's taken from a lengthier, excuse me, a lengthier article, but just seeing what fact checkers do, and I've got the link to this full site available. Lisa says you need the news, this information now, not after COVID. So if you can do some online work in this realm, whether through a Zoom program or just promoting on your website, I think that would be great. Yeah. This is coming out of Cornell University, 4 fact-checking sites, as well as 4 tips for being media literate. And this site also has some good links on the left-hand menu. This is whoops. Okay, whoops, my slides are going wonky. Help, help. What did I do?
I don't know, that it's zoomed in. I don't know how you do that. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Never had that happen before.
Yeah.
This particular graphic I shared at that town meeting a few years ago. The reason I like this is because it not only indicates 5 ways to spot fake news, but look at what this says. It includes asking a librarian. That's why you need to be a little bit on the tech savvy, a news savvy person, an information literate savvy person. So people expect you to be the information expert. And this original source came from Harvard, actually. Now, since COVID's been in the news, and as we were preparing that, this presentation, this was the top story at that time. So we just wanted to talk a little bit, not much, we're going to wrap things up here, but this comes out of the Federal Trade Commission that there have been coronavirus scams coming out online predominantly. So I just want to talk a little bit about this. Being information literate won't just help you be more intelligent about accessing reliable information, but it can also protect you. And being information literate as your patrons, as you teach them how to become that, it can protect your patrons as well. You don't want anybody in your community becoming another victim of an online scam. So your library's website can be the perfect place to provide up-to-date information about current news, and you can provide information about any scam-related stories pertaining to top news. That's a very useful action that your library can actually do. From this FTC website, there are a variety of resources here, including a PDF that you can download about avoiding coronavirus scams and a video about the same topic that you could link from your library's website. This was just published on May 28th of this year. Relatively few Americans have a lot of confidence in their own ability to check the accuracy of the news and information they come across related to the coronavirus. And about 3 out of 10 US adults, that's 28%, say they are very confident that they would know what steps to take to check the accuracy of news and information about the coronavirus outbreak. That's less than 30% feel they are very confident. That means an overwhelming majority are not feeling very confident. And this kind of ties back in with their confidence level in general from other studies that happened before, not just counting the COVID stuff. This came from BBC, which is why the word practice here is spelled a little differently, but I thought this was kind of a fun article. Experts are calling on the public to practice information hygiene in the midst of the coronavirus hygiene. And you can see the article was titled, How to Stop Bad Information from Going Viral. And they share 7 steps. Now, these 7 steps are not how to spot bad news, but it's how to stop bad news from spreading. So the first one, if I can get my mouse back over here to advance the slide. The first one is to stop and think. Stop with knee-jerk reactions to headlines and stop with simple hitting the, oh, click share, must share this with people. Stop, think about what it is, open it up and read it before you pass it on. Often headlines have nothing to do with the actual stories, as you'll discover if you start to read those. We already talked about clickbait being that type of thing. Think by looking at what other sources have to say about the topic. And I really like this BBC graphic that they used. Just as you're cleaning your home, your car, your library, your hands more often, clean up your social media feeds from time to time. Number 2 is to check your source. This is a continuation of the think part from that first step. The article talks about social media posts that begin with, "A friend of my friend's aunt's colleague said," or something to that far-fetched remote connection. So those types of stories and articles are almost always filled with error. And even if the original story was true from that friend of your friend's aunt's colleague, remember when you were a kid, maybe you played that telephone game where it starts out and one person hears the original story and then they have to whisper to the next person and the next person, and it's whispered around the room. And by the time it comes back, it's completely different. Don't always trust the version you just received. Go to the expert resources for viable information. And while experts are sometimes later proven incorrect, they are still more reliable than a stranger's distant relative. Number 3, honestly ask yourself, could this information be fake? The BBC article says check known and verified accounts and websites, and if you aren't easily finding the information, it might be a hoax. If it's a post, a video, or a link, if it looks fishy, it probably is. Capital letters, mismatched fonts are something that fact checkers use as an indicator that a post might be misleading, and that's coming from an organization known as Full Fact.
Yeah, I mean, this is another great confirmation bias thing. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, especially if you see some post that's, oh, this clearly, I knew this had to be true, and then it's not true at all. So
if you are unsure whether it's true, just don't share it. This is kind of like the old when in doubt, leave it out advice. The BBC article says don't forward things on a just in case they might be true, because you're doing more harm than good. Number 5, kind of what I was saying earlier with those evaluation tips, that you have to check each fact individually and go through all those steps of an evaluation tool. This is where it starts to get harder, and I think this is why people typically don't want to go to this trouble, because it does become harder. If you just stop at number 4 and you just don't share, you will have done some fine work in preventing misinformation from spreading. But to try to counter that misinformation with truth, you need to roll up your sleeves and really start doing some fact checking. The article says when you get sent long lists of advice, it's easy to believe everything in them just because you know for certain that one of the tips, let's say hand washing in a COVID example, is true. But don't assume that just because one statement or fact in the story is true, that the rest of the statements or facts are true. Check each one. Number 6 is beware of emotional posts or how posts affect your emotions. From the article, it says, it's the stuff that gets us fearful, angry, anxious, or joyful that tends to really go viral. Fear is one of the biggest drivers that allows misinformation to thrive. Again, quoting that person from First Draft. Urgent calls for action are designed to ramp up anxiety, so be careful. I purposely chose this graphic of the heart and the brain hand in hand here, because you've really got to keep your heart and your head in line, because if you let one take over, you're either not thinking or you're not feeling, and you have to be able to keep both in check.
And I want to go back to that too. I mean, this one hit on a core tenet of the sharing sort of business model. I mean, I hear more people talk about it like the internet is just kind of a rage machine. It's just you kind of get on it and you get your attitude fired up and move things, and people share things and it makes more clicks, because that's the motivation behind it. Want to share more clicks for more ads. So keeping you enraged is part of the deal, and putting your emotions kind of in check really helps with that.
Mm-hmm. Finally, number 7, think about biases, both your own and those of the author of the information or the sender of the information. And again, from this article, are you sharing something because you know it's true or just because you agree with it? They quote someone who is part of the Center for the Analysis of Social Media, who says we're more likely to share posts that reinforce our existing beliefs, kind of that confirmation bias we talked about earlier. It's when we're angrily nodding our head that we're most vulnerable. That's when, above everything else, we just need to slow down everything that we do online, says this person. So again, here's a slightly varied graphic of what we shared earlier about center versus left versus right versus far left, far right, some of these news sources that you might see. Now, don't get confused when you see something like CNN being under this left column with CNN opinion being far left. You notice that some of these say online news only. There are several versions of this kind of guide available online, and it's just a helpful, it's not a die hard. Don't say, oh, Marianne and Jay said that this particular resource is this label. That's not what we're trying to tell you here. These are only guidelines. But it can help you with your reference resources or reference work at your library by pulling from maybe this particular source and this source and this source. So you're getting a broad spectrum of information that you might need to share with a patron on a particular topic. Jay, did you want to add more to that?
You know, and once again, always keep in mind the commercial nature of a lot of these. I mean, a lot of those ones that are sitting in the center, you know, NPR, BBC, those have public funding of those in part. You know, Reuters and the AP, they're feeding lots of things into these other news organizations, but their mandate is kind of there just to do the facts. You know, and so just look at the motivations of things of these things across the line when you talk about them.
Yeah. This was a lot of information to fit into a relatively short period of time. There is a lot more that we could have said and a lot more examples and tips we could have shared, but we try to just give you some basic things that, as I said earlier, these are things you should all be able to do and be able to easily share with your public. But I wanted to share this particular graphic as a closing that you're much better than Google because you smile and you talk. You don't get me paid for advertising when you're trying to help, and you have a heart. So I think this is something to think about, that when people come to you for information, this is why. Realize that when people come to you for information, they have probably already Googled everything. And I think it's very disheartening for a patron to come to your desk and ask for help, and the first thing you do is pull up Google. Now, I'm not slamming Google because I love it, but you might want to say, tell me what kind of search term you used when you used Google, and just ask them, what source did you use to try to find the information? And then if they say Google, say, what search term did you use? Because you don't want to just start replicating the same thing they've already done. That's not a way to be overly helpful. So keep that in mind. There is our contact information if you want to reach out to either one of us. Somebody asks if the slides will be available later. And yes, Samantha, I think we're planning to make the slides available in the recording. Samantha, I think maybe I'll stop sharing my screen now. And I wasn't able to keep up with all of the chat. I'm hoping maybe you monitored for questions.
Yeah, we did a great chat though. Thank you so much. It was very good.
I love when people chat. That helps me know I have an audience. I'm not just talking to my computer screen here.
Yeah.
Oh, Samantha, you're muted. I saw you say, oh no.
Okay. Is that good audio now? Can you hear me?
Oh, well, that's very nice to hear.
Okay, good. Yeah, no, I always say with Google, you know, any construction worker loves his hammer, but he doesn't use his hammer for everything. You know, it's a tool in our toolbox like anything else. So I think I don't knock it at all, just like I don't knock a hammer. Or that, hold on.
Well, there.
Never mind. But yeah, very helpful. So yeah, we did record this session, and we will make the slides and the recording available for you to share with your staff. One person asked if they could grab like a screenshot of your slides and share on their social media. And I guess I don't see why not. One thing to keep in mind, of course, is we spent an hour and a half talking about some of the context here. And so to just throw up a slide and say, okay, now you know it, folks. Fox News leans right.
Yeah, be careful.
That's not a super helpful indicator
No.
either. So you just want to make sure that you're helping people understand
I did include the
context.
URLs to all of the information that I gleaned. If it didn't have a URL, it came from public domain, just the graphics that you can access from PowerPoint. But all the others, I did include a URL where I got the information or the graphic, and I would encourage you to access that actual site and choose from there, or maybe share that link instead of just the slide. I think that's a little more authentic if you do it that way.
Yeah, helping someone learn to do those evaluations themselves.
Mhm.
A lot of those
Cyn-
media sites have great graphics and all kinds of stuff on all kinds of things about
Yeah.
these.
Yeah. Cynthia asked, as well as Google, the original search engine, we have to adapt to current trends. And that's a longer answer than we have time for, but
I
yeah,
actually think there
Google
was one
is,
out before Google. I can't remember the
yeah,
name of it anymore. But yeah, librarians are the original search engine, right? And I think I have a T-shirt
that,
somewhere that
yeah.
says that.
Oh, that is what I've read too fast. Isn't it that we are the original search
Yeah.
engine? Yes, there you go. Exactly. And I always am reminding people that Google at the end of the day is an advertising company.
Mm-hmm.
And so of course, how you use Google is not a neutral proposition.
Nope.
Well,
Good.
that's a broader question for all this too. It's like, why is social media free? Well, because you're what they're selling.
You're the
Mhm.
Your
product.
social media interaction is what they're selling. So,
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
but yeah, and those search results you get. I mean, I I was absolutely flabbergasted. Not that long ago when I tried to Google Ticketmaster. I mean, here I'd look really closely at all this stuff, and I almost got taken by an entire website that was a fraudulent Ticketmaster site. So I mean, you can
Yeah,
get
it's getting harder and harder.
yeah.
The fraudulent people and their scams are getting much slicker than they used to be.
I mean it. And I felt like oh no, am I getting less aware or are they getting smarter? You don't know.
One thing we didn't mention that Google has improved since a few years back, that in that result list, a lot of times it will say ad, ad,
Ad.
ad.
Yeah, that was my
That's a
point.
big sign. You probably don't want to click
Mhm.
that link as a resource. But
I think they've started taking that indicator down again. You have
Oh,
to watch
really?
Yeah,
that.
yeah, you have to look.
Mhm.
That's why it's a good. That's why like PubMed and those ones are good ones, because like the second you get on those, you can tell right away. There's no ads in those. It's all government medical information that
Mhm.
that's it's so in the public interest to make that information accurate, because people will die if it's wrong. There's a reason to make it unad influenced. But it doesn't apply to lots of other things.
Yep.
Did we have any questions that came along, or do you have questions now? So go ahead and type those in the box. We have a few minutes here.
I think, as people are thinking of questions as well, we initially had set this webinar up in the context of the election. And of course, the pandemic gave us new misinformation to be aware of. But I would just encourage folks who are thinking of doing this kind of programming in their library that there's perennial problems to be had with how we present this information. So even if we get through this, if and when we get through this pandemic and we learn so much, the election is just a few months away, and there'll be a whole new scam of
Well, and we have a
scams.
whole new, I shouldn't say it's a new issue, it's been an ongoing issue, but a whole perhaps new awareness of issues in our country right now that have taken the forefront in the news. And I think there are lots of perspectives. Is it a 6 or is it a 9 that are floating around? And if we can step back and say, let me hear your story, like somebody said, listen to learn, not listen to respond. I just think that is vital right now.
Mm-hmm.